day or night to be here with us. My name is Tirsa Villegas, and I am the Director of Witness for Peace Southeast. I'm located here in Durham, and I represent the Southeast of the US. So if you live in this region and you are going to want to be thinking about engagement afterward, I'll be putting my email in the chat later. So this delegation took place in January from the 13th to the 22nd, and we were mainly in Valle de Cauca. We started in Cali and we traveled around to different cities in the region. And originally we started this delegation because we had the idea of bringing in faith leaders from different faith communities to be thinking about peace, right? And the struggle for peace in Colombia. Thinking about paz total, which Barbara from our Colombia team is going to talk about in just a second, but why political action is so important for people of peace, why the spiritual and the political are inherently connected, and how we could learn about that from community leaders, grassroots leaders in Colombia. So that was the original idea for the delegation. That was when we started recruiting the people that we were trying to bring in, and it evolved a bit, but the subject matter, the reason we were there to talk about peace and why action and peace have to be connected still remained, and that was the thread of the delegation. So I'm going to let Barbara talk a little bit about what paz total in Colombia was, and just so you can have some context if you hear that term come up as people are presenting on the different communities that we visited. So we're going to present briefly on those communities, and then we're going to have some time for question and answer. Our Colombia team is going to talk a little bit about some of the things that those communities were asking from us, some concrete asks and some broad asks. And then we're going to talk just a little bit about our organization and things that are coming up. So Barbara, if you want to go ahead and just introduce Paz Total, and if you don't have good signal, then Jessica.
Hi, thank you, Tisa. Thank you. Yeah, very briefly about Paz Total means that after more than 50 years of conflict, armed conflict in Colombia, and after the peace accord signed in 2016, the armed conflict in Black Indigenous territories of the Black Indigenous and peasant communities is still going on. So last year, with the new government had possession in August, they put up a law that is called Paz Total. This law, between others, means that the government could talk and start talk with all armed groups to get the Paz Total in the country. This law was signed and approved in November 2022. And from that moment, since that moment, the government started to talk with the guerrillas, ELN, FARC, and paramilitaries, and all groups that are still in arms in Colombia. The first place that the Paz Total has been implemented right now was Buenaventura in Valle del Cauca. So this is the first place that they try to talk with all groups, our groups over there, to reach an agreement to stop classes and using arms to continue this armed conflict and stop it. Hopefully, I'm explaining well.
Yeah, thank you, Barbara, for that context on total peace. And I think y'all are going to hear throughout this presentation the people's hopes for total peace, and just how difficult and complex it is, as I think we all know. So I'm going to start the presentation with the first community that we visited. Oh, no, I'm going to start with Colombia quick facts. Thank you, Jackie. So just a few things about Colombia for those who haven't been or who maybe don't follow. Colombia right now is the most dangerous place on earth to be a land defender, right? They send more officers to the School of the Americas for military training, not than any other country. They are currently the largest recipient of US military aid in the Western Hemisphere. And of course, that aid is not going to help the people of Colombia. They partner with NATO to receive military aid. So they received like arms, for example, from our wars in the Middle East. The 2016 peace accord is part of the big background for this delegation, right? That was signed in 2016 with FARC, with the armed groups there. And that's the paz total, the total peace has come out from since that. And since the signing of the peace accord, more than 1,300 human rights defenders and leaders have been assassinated, right, since that signing. And mostly those are people who were supposed to have been protected under the peace accords, people who were leading these groups that we are in peace talks with these groups, and their leaders are being assassinated. So as you can imagine, it's hard to talk about peace with groups when you are assassinating their leaders. New people have to step in, and obviously everything gets infinitely complicated. So this is, our delegation team is sprinkled throughout this photo. It was the only group photo we could find. It was a really great group. This was in Timba. And this is the Reinas del Siglo XXI.
What's not?
Yep. And this is going to be our final presentation. So you will hear a bit about this group that we are in this photo with. So the first organization that we met with was in Cali. This was our first day, Fundación Guagua, Galería de la Memoria Tiberio Fernández. So the memory gallery was named after Tiberio Fernández, who was a Catholic priest. He was assassinated. And a tiny bit of context about Cali. It is named City of the Resistance recently for a lot of the resistance of protests that have been happening there. And Cali is the third biggest city in Colombia. It is the industrial hub, and it's been built up largely by US capital and businesses, US meddling, they just call it. And US presence is so big in Colombia. In 1944, at the end of World War II, the US State Department had essentially mapped out Colombia for future use, mostly agricultural use. And after this, the agricultural projects in Colombia began at huge scales. And that's, I think it's 90 out of every $100 of Colombia comes into Buenaventura. And many of the people in that region a lot of that money is US. And so Fundación Guagua was founded in 2000, and it started essentially by different religious groups coming together with liberation theology roots. I'm trying not to go over, make sure I'm brief here. And so again, it was named after Tiberio Fernández, who was a priest, a Catholic priest in Trujillo. And he was a really big community leader at the end of the 80s in the Campesino movement. It was a really strong movement at that time. And he was seeing a lot of needs in his community. He had really deep relationships with the Jesuits. And he did a lot of studying, trying to figure out different ways, different cooperative models that he could help this community, the rural community there. So just a brief example of what he did. So there's a lot of blackberry farmers. That's cooler climate. So up in the mountains, those people needed jeeps to bring their blackberries down to where the markets were. They were being taken advantage of. So a lot of the large scale blackberry growers would wait until the last minute to buy these blackberries at a discount because they knew that people couldn't take them back to the mountains, that they had to sell them. And so people were waiting until the last minute And so he organized with the communities, people who had coolers, people who had jeeps, and he helped these campesinos to create these structures, these internal structures in their communities. So a lot of things happened, and essentially Tiberio was assassinated for denouncing the government. There was many things happening in between with the cartels, with the Colombian government, with the local governments. And he essentially denounced the government, said that he would not provide the Eucharist, he wouldn't provide the sacrament until certain crimes were investigated. And so he ended up being like on the run from the government. He was captured and he was very violently tortured, as were members of his family. He was decapitated. Other parts of his body were cut up and his body was thrown into the river. This image that you see on the right is a drawing that his nephew did of him, and he wrote a poem, and this drawing of Tiberio became a symbol for the community. And this galeria is a gallery, it's a photo gallery. If you go, you'll see images of many people who also lost their lives doing work in the community. And so now Jackie is going to talk a little bit more about the galeria and about the work that they were doing there in Cali.
Thank you, Tirsa. My name is Jackie Watakira. I am an artist and an educator based in Chicago, Illinois, and I'm also of the Colombian diaspora. So Tirsa went ahead and gave some context about Colombia and about quick facts about La Galeria specifically. So alongside being named after Padre Tiberio, they currently work to preserve historical memory of state crimes that people in Colombia and in the area have faced interpersonally and those that of those around them, by accompanying families and of the victims, doing community workshops and popular education, specifically focused on the conflict in Colombia. And because of that, they are a target for threats from a variety of armed actors, especially because they have a message that they want to spread of never again, of forced disappearances, of assassinations, of genocides, and things of that nature, traumatic events that have affected the community. Areas that they kind of focus on are therapy and support groups for people who have had family members and loved ones who have been forced disappeared. So they have never been able to find out kind of what happened to those people in their lives. Assassinations, and kind of they provide different outlets for them to work through this trauma. One focus is artistic outlets. So from capoeira classes to actually creating physical artwork. There is a picture here on the slide that shows one example of this piece that they worked on in community groups. So they represent these traumatic events that their communities have faced. So of different kind of community assassinations and genocides, like I have mentioned. So that is kind of represented in the circle. And the name of the community that was affected kind of goes around the circle. So this one says Santo Domingo. And then there are two slits that when you turn it around, it provides the name of somebody who they're memorializing, so a family or a loved one. And then on the side of it, it gives some context of who they were as a person. And as they turn the circle, it shows the different people and kind of has it focus on that one specific person as you turn it around, to kind of just understand the individuals who've been affected by these traumatic events. La Galeria also focuses on food sovereignty, agroecology, human rights, and comprehensive agrarian reform, which are some of the main issues that these communities are facing in Colombia. So like we had mentioned before earlier in the presentation, since 2016, when the initial peace accords were signed, over 1,300 social leaders and human rights defenders have been assassinated, including 4 people from the town of Miranda, which we had the opportunity to visit. So upwards of 40% of social leaders kind of face the possibility of being targets for threats and being assassinated or forced disappeared, which makes it a very dangerous place to be a land defender, like we mentioned before. And now we're going to speak further about another one of the organizations that we had the opportunity to visit.
Thank you, Jackie. Hello, everyone. My name is Minjae. I attended the delegation as one of the faith leaders as part of the North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church. So you heard Tirsa before speaking about wanting to bring along faith leaders. I myself am a clergy person specifically, and we also had lay persons from our churches also attend. And it was indeed a powerful, powerful trip to be able to see how everything is so interwoven and how rooted these resistance movements are to spiritual practices and spirituality. So one of the organizations that we were able to learn more about and meet members of is the Federación Nacional Síndica Unitaria Agropecuaria, or FENSUAGRO. And in English, it's translated as National Unitary Agricultural Union Federation. So some quick facts about FENSUAGRO. It is the oldest peasant-led. So when you hear the term campesina, it can be translated to English as peasants. So it is the oldest peasant-led union member organization in Colombia. Back in 2022, when they made the banner of hashtag 46 años de lucha, like it is now year 47 of their resistance. It was established in 1976, and they are also one of the oldest South American members of La Via Campesina. And La Via Campesina is translated as the peasant's way, and that is an international organization. FENSUAGRO is made up of farmers and farm workers of Indigenous and Afro descent. It has 52 union members, 23 peasant associations, and that encapsulates more than 80,000 families across 22 departments. And there are 32 departments in Colombia, so 22 departments out of 32. And departments are sort of similar to what folks in the US like myself know as states. So more than 80,000 families are part of this union member organization. So you can see the area of work, a lot of it is interlocking. For generations, rural Afro-Colombian and Indigenous peoples have worked without any land titles. So there were no protection for them because of the lack of recognized documentation. And as you can imagine, this makes them vulnerable to exploitation from well-oiled transnational agro-businesses and wealthy landowners who take advantage of these gaps, even though there are people on the land. Because they don't have recognized documentation, they are taken advantage of. And they take away their land, saying that they have bought it and acquired land titles, or force people to work under unfair working conditions. Thus, FENSUAGRO focuses on these interlocking areas of work like food sovereignty and agroecology, human rights, comprehensive agrarian reform, so that the peasant's way of being, doing, and living is actually respected, recognized, and treated with dignity. It's not just about the human individual. It's not just about a community of people, but for these organizations, these people who are part of this organization, they understand that they cannot be cut off from the land. How they interact and how they have relationship not only to one another, but to the land is extremely important and is part of how they build identity and understand their own selves. So when union member organizations resist being taken advantage of, and when they seek to uphold their rights to be treated with basic human dignity and respect, they are met with heavy resistance. So in the case of many social movement leaders, as Jackie highlighted earlier, it is a violent space. These leaders are met with brutal violence. They're not only met with death threats, but continued direct assassinations and forced disappearances. As we've heard about the work of the Galería de la Memoria, it's not something in the past. It's not something in the 80s. It's not something in the 90s. It is still a very present reality on the grounds in Colombia. So in the year 2020, 310 social leaders and human rights defenders were assassinated in Colombia, including the 4 people from the town of Miranda. This is their daily current reality, a daily current reality, as we've seen, spanning nearly half a century. They are on their 47th year of resistance work. And while explicit policies like Paz Total about the 1991 Constitution, while these explicit sort of documentations are becoming more recognized globally, it does not mean that it is implemented across the board on the ground. The daily realities of these peasant people is still one that is filled with difficulty and violence. And because of the new president and vice president elections, they are doing a really strong push so that the spirit of the 1991 Constitution, the newest peace accord that was signed in 2016, can actually be embodied in the people, communities, organizations, businesses, and across all and everything in the country. And something really important to highlight, it was only since the 1991 Constitution that everyone, the multi-ethnic and multicultural composition of Colombia, everyone was actually recognized as having legal kind of status. Before the 1991 reformed Constitution, Indigenous Afro-Colombian folks were not regarded as legal people under the Constitution. So it is wild for me coming in, recognizing it's only been within the span of my lifetime that these folks have finally begun gaining constitutional rights. And while everything sounds bleak and despair, there is some beautiful work, a lot of strong resistance that is happening, not only to survive, but to thrive in the ways, especially to highlight the ways of being as peasant farmers. So one example is this Instituto Agroecológico Latinoamericano María Cano. And it's abbreviated as IALA María Cano. So if you would like to nerd out after our presentation, like there is a QR code that you can scan with your phone, or you can look up the title of the academic paper, and it's available free online that you can actually read about the process. But this is specifically a Universidad Campesina. It is specifically a university for Campesino by Campesinos. So it is a school created for and by the peasant people. And the name María Cano is after the Colombian poet, as you can see in her picture, a poet and writer who was Colombia's first female political leader and who led the struggle for workers' rights. And this Campesino University was started so that the ways of peasant farming, the ways of doing agricultural work can be preserved in the community. A lot of wealthy city people who studied agroecology kind of demonized and looked down upon the ways that campesinos did their work. And a lot of the wealthy people taking advantage of campesino communities not having land titles, right? They took away the land and tried to be farmers themselves. But this is a way that the campesino community resisted. It is a technical and professional tool to be able to transmit information to the next generation. And because this is a community built, community ground up effort, it also uplifts the women of the community who are oftentimes the wisdom holders, as well as the youth, so that there is a cycle of leadership building. And these movements help the communities resist the way that international companies, push for monoculture. These movements help communities resist using GMO seeds and instead preserve and continue the practice of traditional seed preservation, growing foods and healing and cultivating the soil from generations of monocultural planting. And this work is extremely difficult. It is beautiful, but it is also difficult. There's a lot of resistance. There's a lot of threats. And it's hard to get recognition of a very indigenous and very community-led ways of knowing and being, because professionals don't respect those who don't have the same degrees after their names, right? Most people in these peasant communities have not finished high school, and yet they have embodied generations of good, solid wisdom that needs to be shared. There's resistance to peasant agroecology because it does mean moving away from the very for-profit models of monocultural farming practices. And those who have financial and land resources are just unwilling to let the peasant people take charge. So these spaces of organized resistance are being continued to be uplifted. You can follow them on Facebook. You can read more about all of these emerging works. And we can show respect for the work that these communities are doing to resist the genocide of their ways of being.
Yeah, thanks so much, Minjae. My name's Evan, based here in Bogota, Colombia, part of the Witness for Peace Solidarity Collective. I've been a part of the collective since 2018, and I've had the privilege to accompany many of these communities, in particular, Asprosonac, which is a community that I'm going to speak more about. Very related to what Minjae was speaking about, Asprosonac, or the Pro-Constitution Association of the Peasant Reserve Zone of Miranda, very long names, is one of these peasant associations that is part of Pensuagro. We're able to see a lot of different practices at the local level that build up to this kind of more macro change of changing the way in which the economy and the society itself kind of functions. If you can go to the next slide. I was going to say a couple of things, quick facts for Asprosonac. Again, it's a member of Pensuagro. It's their land in which they created this Campesino reserve zone, which is still a kind of legal entity that campesinos in Colombia are fighting for political recognition, right? Political rights as campesinos in order to preserve their way of life and preserve their practices. So this land was won actually through struggle back in 2013 during what's called an agrarian strike, or paro agrario, where peasant communities, indigenous communities, Black communities come together and basically put a halt to the agrarian economy, which is one of the pillars of Colombia's economy. So in 2013, they all came out and blocked the streets, blocked the economy to a halt in order to negotiate redistribution of land, which Colombia is one of the most unequal countries on earth, if not the most unequal country on earth when it comes to land redistribution or land distribution. I think 80% of the land is in the hand of less than 1% of the population. So this is actually a symbol and kind of an example of really active peasant struggles in Colombia and how land has been such a key factor in both kind of creating the conditions for the armed conflict, but also land being a contributing factor towards building peace when it's distributed more equally. So La Elvira is this farm that is about 100 hectares, which is about 220 acres in US metrics, where about 25 peasant families live, and each of them have a plot of 5 hectares, so about 12 or so acres maybe, where they grow crops for their own consumption and very small forms of commercialization. They also, what's very particular about La Elvira is that they actually gave 10 hectares to former FARC combatants that had laid down their weapons after the 2016 peace accords, and who were rejected by a lot of society. But these peasants, despite being victims of the armed conflict, were so committed to building peace in their community that they welcomed them. And they actually established a tilapia farm and a number of other productive projects alongside these former combatants who have pledged to give much of those profits to the community in order to build a Campesino university. As Minjae was talking about, it's a different Campesino university, but it's the same exact concept, as well as to promote other projects, like a women's cooperative, a women-led cooperative that is kind of using coca and marijuana in order to create medicine, right? And ointments and other kinds of organic products, which is also kind of re-signifying this whole drug war mentality that, these plants are evil, these plants are fueling the conflict, but instead they're making medicine out of these plants that have been so demonized by the US government for decades. In 2021, they created a Campesino university of their own in La Elvira, where 35 students have graduated from agroecology courses. Of course, they have also other like economics courses of all sorts, in order to promote a locally based and community-based or community-led economy. And currently there are 28 students taking courses at the Campesino University, which is obviously under threat for everything that Minjae had mentioned. It's still a very complicated place for social leaders. Many of them are under threat constantly. There's still active guerrillas in the region, right? So there's still lots of paramilitary groups that are backed by right-wing forces that are constantly trying to undermine these projects of self-determination and food sovereignty. So that was very quickly an overview. I don't know if Matthew, you want to talk a little bit about agroecology practices.
Yeah, I was really moved by the welcome they gave our team when we came into the area, and I'll never forget a quote. And my name is Matthew Locklear, and like MJ, I'm a United Methodist clergy person from North Carolina, and I'm also Lumbee Indian, so I'm Native American. And so a lot of the agriculture ties to the land really resonated with me, and the idea and the hospitality that we received was so moving, because you understand and know that they've had to fight and struggle for everything that they have, and they have a real tie to the land that gives them life, even though the government has restricted their control and power of it. But a quote that I'll never forget is from one of the leaders, who was a woman, refused to give her wound over to war anymore. And she's taking back the land through these wonderful agricultural practices. And that included a fish pond, that included a garden that they just opened to and encouraged us to pluck from and to eat. And it was just in the midst of all that they're going through. There's great hope there, and what they need is for people of faith and people who are American, and we have a connection to our government to encourage the Colombian leaders to do the right thing with regard to these communities. These are people who love their country, who love their land, and are willing to share in its benefits. And as a person of faith, as a person who believes in both a love of God, but also a love of your community and the land that you're on. And I just see a group that just wants to love the world, be in peace, and use the land that God has given them to do extraordinary things. And it's just so wonderful to see their willingness to share. And I really want to help them, and we all want to make an impact on their lives. So thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Jessica Garcia. I'm part of the Colombia team here in Colombia. I'm here in Bogota since 4 years and 2 years with the Solidarity Collective, and I was part of the coordination of this delegation in Cauca and Valle del Cauca. I'm going to tell you a little more about the Proceso de Comunidades Negras or Black communities process in Colombia. This is really important grassroots organization in the country. This PCN is a Black organizational network that articulates more than 140 grassroots organizations and community council around all the country. It was consolidated in the beginning of the 90s after a long journey on the union of various efforts within the social movement after the change of the national constitution in Colombia in 1991. And after this process that allowed the legislation of the Law 70 in 1993, that is considered the law of the Black communities. In this law is recognized the identity of Black communities and also recognize the collective property of collective territories around the country. And it has been one of the biggest struggle of Black communities and Indigenous communities in defense of the collective territories. In this case, we worked with this process in Buenaventura. That is one of the cities, and that's also Barbara mentioned even in the beginning, where the Paz Total has tried to be implemented, or at least the beginning of this new process. And in this case, the role of the PSN is very important in defense of the Black communities in the Pacific region, where is the majority of Black people in Colombia is in all the coast of the country. And in the case of Buenaventura, well, the Solidarity Collective has accompanied their different process since the beginning of our presence here in after the Plan Colombia. And in the last year, we have been accompanied process of a community council of Calima, Bajo Calima, and that is a region, one of the rivers around Buenaventura, where people has been suffering a lot of forced displacement since a years and a half, and until now the situation hasn't been solved. Even in this process of paz total, the communities continue displaced, not only Black communities, but also indigenous communities. And almost all the communities that used to live around the Calima River has been displaced to Buenaventura and cities around Buenaventura. And their humanitarian situation is really hard, but it's not the only case, because another Black communities in the rivers like Yurumangui, Naya, and other regions, the rural areas, has been very affected by the armed conflict and the confrontation between paramilitary groups and the ELN. And because of that, the community has been forced to leave the territories. In this process, PCN has been very important, supporting the communities, organizing the communities, training the communities in the recognition of their own rights and defense of their own rights, and try to make some communitarian dialogues in some moment that has been necessary with the armed actors in the regions, where they are a reference in defense of human rights, but also in defense of Black communities' rights and in defense of their identity around the country. But we have been focused our accompaniment in this region in Buenaventura, in particular with these Black communities from the Calima River that continues displaced in the city. They are in really humanitarian bad conditions, and also another communities of the rural areas. And we hope that this paz total process brings some calm and hope for people, and the possibility to return to their homes, because that is the intention. After years and a half, nobody going to be just out of home, and they need to come back there, and because of that, it's really important continues accompanying this process and continues accompanying this organization, and remembering that the peace is not real yet in the country, and it's really important that we continue making visible what is going on in the Pacific, but also in another region of the country. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jory Bryant. I'm from Durham, North Carolina. This is actually my second delegation to Colombia, and this community organization Renacer Siglo we actually visited both times. The community is made up of the organization made up of several different communities: the Pablo Blanco, Colombo, La Ventura, Agua Blanca, Buenos Aires, La Balsa, Guardia, Guardia Cimarrones, Community Council of Cauca River, and the Land Defenders of Suarez, with just some of the folks that we're representing. This community, they share a lot of information with us, and they had a lot of representation from different councils. To name a few was the Council of Families, Education, the Women's Brasa organization, the Elders, and the Victims Association, and the youth. Primarily, one thing that was very key, because we had visited this community before something that was very evident in the communication was how harsher things have gotten either under the new presidency, and why total peace was necessary. So just some key points that they shared with us is that Buenos Aires, this community, the space that we were in, was selected as a project for the peace process. And they've been waiting for the implementation of the peace agreements. Because the government is focused on ag businesses, a lot of the disparity between farmers who are already there existing and these new agricultural projects coming in has been a part of displacement. And because of the many peace accords that have existed before, this was supposed to be a community where the ethnic chapter of the 2016 peace accords have allowed this land to be, 2012, allowed this land to be owned and shared collectively by the community. But the amount of violence that paramilitary and guerrillas they've been experiencing in that community has made it very dangerous for them to exist. And they had, they shared a lot of facts around it. So the Kroc Institute of Notre Dame had investigated the implementation of the peace accords, and they said that less than 3% of the land had actually gone to ethnic communities that it was promised to. And the issue with that is that Colombia actually imports 85% of the food. So these communities don't even have land to actually produce food to sustain themselves on. And in that, they shared with us that, because of the lack of peace, that it's not just the bullets that are actually killing them, they're experiencing violence, but it's also corruption and hunger that's forcibly displacing them from their communities. And, we talked about the US government and how much money it actually has given, quote unquote, to actual implementation of the peace accords, which there was over 482 million just for the implementation, and 280 million of that was actually for the Black communities, but they haven't seen any of that money. Only 70 million of that has gone, and that wasn't enough. And so it actually hasn't really done anything. And many leaders have gone to advocate for themselves to Congress, and they've written letters to the US Embassy, and they're just not seeing anything. And one thing that they wanted to definitely let us know about was that although they have had a new government, that the new government has only been in power for a little bit under 2 years now, hasn't had an opportunity to actually shift anything because of they're surrounded by the former regime's government, elected or government officials, but also they're trying to fix 200 years of issues within the country. And one of the leaders actually, because of the violence, they had to leave their community for 2 months just to seek peace. So I wanted to lay that out because I think, it being my second term, you hope that when you go and you hear these things and governments change, that you would think that things would actually get better. But because of the US's involvement in the trade, and the exports and the imports of that nation, it definitely is incentivized for less change. And the government and the leadership, Petro and Francia Marquez, trying to shift things, but there's a desire for the U.S. to hold the other powers to be accountable, not just those two, but the other factors that to make sure that the peace accords are actually being upheld. And I'm gonna stop there.
So at this time, we are going to hear from our Colombia team, and they're going to talk to us a little bit about the things that the communities have asked specifically from us, the things that they were asking from us on the delegation in January, and the things that they are still asking now, some of the things that we can do. Jessica or Barbara, go for it.
Thank you, Tisa. As I was mentioning before, in this moment, we don't have any specific request from the communities and organizations. In some moment, it's happened because some threats or some.
Jessica, I cannot hear you.
No? But
I can hear you.
you hear me now?
Yes, you're good.
Yes, I as I mentioned before, I think there are not any concrete petition in this moment from the organizations and communities. Sometimes there are some petition because some threats or some high risks for the organization or some social leaders. But there are some general petitions from citizens from the US because as you know, and we were mentioning it during this presentation, the impact of the militarization funding by the US continues, and the Pacific region where we have been has been one of the more militarized regions in the country. The impact of this militarization continues on the communities, and the violence against the communities, in particular Campesino, Black, and Indigenous communities, continues. And it hasn't stopped even with the peace accord of 2016. Because of that, it's so important that we make visible what is going on here and to support this process of paz total that is a very ambitious intention from this new government, but we understand that it's important to continue supporting and try to make this process real for all the communities that we have accompanied. And in this point, it's important just to continue supporting the work of the Solidarity Collective and to make visible in case that we share with you some urgent actions to protect some social leaders, and that they are in continuous risk. In some moment, the risk increase and there are some new threats. And it's in these cases that we support you with some letters to the embassy or to the US government, or some in each case we decide what is the best option. And in this moment, it's important your support and to make visible that we need to protect these people who are defending human rights and communities in their territories. What more? I think that when Evan now is going to comment some concrete action that we are going to, or activities that we are going to do in the next months and year in Colombia. We are organizing a speakers tour, and would be important if you are in North Carolina supporting us, if we get to the visa to our partner here, and also participate in the delegation and just helping us to amplify our voices and the voices of the communities and organizations here in Colombia. And thank you so much for being here.
All right. So Jordan, put that on mute. Thank you. We are going to have a time for question and answers, and then we'll go into the delegations that are coming up and the the other events that are happening locally. And just to add really quickly to what Jessica was saying at the end, our organization, Witness for Peace, Solidarity Collective, we host these delegations like this one. And a lot of our money comes from those delegations. And then a lot of our networks come from these delegations. So the people like these who presented today come back, talk about the work. And that is the main thing that people ask, is they say, like, tell these stories that are happening, let people know what's going on in this country. And so participating on events like this, coming to these things, going on the delegations, and then the speakers tour, like Jessica said, which is where we bring speakers from the country where we have teams. We bring them to here. We're going to probably have one in North Carolina in the fall. And they come here and they talk in person about what's going on, and then they go back. And so all of these ways of engaging are very, very important. So we're going to open up for question and answers. Feel free to come off of mute or put something in the chat. And just please specify if you have something, if you have a question for the Colombia team specifically, or if you have a question for the delegates. And also, this could be a good time if delegates have any additional comments they wanted to make, or if people wanted to put, delegates, anybody else, if you wanted to put information in the chat to do some networking. I will put mine. Again, I'm the director here in the Southeast, and I don't just work in the Southeast. If there's anybody that wants to engage or to figure out how to engage, and you can contact me. Evan does a lot of our communications work, is living in Colombia. And then of course, Jessica and Barbara are living in Colombia right now and are doing that work on the ground. And the Colombia team email is right here in the chat. Thank you. And thank you, Jay and Veronica, for your comments. Thank you, Jay, for coming on the delegation in 2011. And Veronica, hopefully you'll be able to come to one. All right, any questions or comments?
Yeah, if there's no questions, I'll maybe just bring up some things of folks, how folks can support us at Solidarity Collective. This year is our 40th anniversary as Witness for Peace. We were founded in 1983. I think I could talk a little bit more about like the upcoming events that are going to happen in North Carolina that folks can be involved with, even if you're not from North Carolina. There's ways you can be involved online. And also, if you're interested in this kind of work, please join one of our upcoming delegations. We have some really interesting delegations going this summer. We have one coming up to Honduras around ecofeminism and resistance. Very similar dynamics happening in Honduras. Also a neo-colonial relationship with the United States. So it's a really good opportunity to connect with women and queer folks who are leading the struggle in Honduras, as well as our delegations to Cuba. Of course, the US has been blockading Cuba illegally for over 60 years. And we believe that we can end that blockade, the criminal blockade that the US has imposed on the people of Cuba. So if you're interested at all in building solidarity with folks in Latin America, this is a great way to do it. And we have a ton of delegations going also in the fall. So go to our website, upcoming delegations, solidaritycollective.org/upcoming-delegations. And you can find all sorts of information on how to be a part of those delegations. And again, it's also a great way to connect with other solidarity activists come together who live in the United States. So, if you want to build a community around this, is always a great way. And if you want to support us financially, obviously we're a really small grassroots organization. We welcome any donation. It makes a huge difference to support our programs on the ground who provide physical and political accompaniment to these organizations that are facing huge threats from U.S. funded, trained military forces, as well as U.S. companies that want to extract resources from their land. So if you can go to patreon.com/solidaritycollective, we have Patreon, or you can go to our website and donate directly. Become a sustaining donor is always great. So that was it. I just want to plug that.
Thank you, Evan, for all that. All of these links are in the chat. So I put the link for the upcoming delegations. And these delegations, we rely on help from our networks to recruit for these delegations. So if you want to come on one, but you cannot, then please do send this out to people. If you think that these trips will be really formative to someone you know, please send them out. We have so many people in our network, so many professors, so many pastors, lawyers who went on a delegation in their teens and their 20s and their 30s, and it changed their life and it changed the course of their work. So these delegations are so powerful for so many reasons. And then Jessica posted some articles. Those articles are really, really rich, really just so full of information. Of course, they come from direct interactions that our team has with these communities. So you can find really good articles on our website about all of our communities that we work with. And our 40th anniversary fundraiser, if you are in North Carolina, specifically in Central North Carolina, we are going to be having a 40th anniversary fundraiser. It's going to be a benefit concert with some really just amazing bands. And also there's going to be local artisans. So please go ahead and click on all these links to our website, to this event. And if you want to support our work, if you want to support our paychecks, if you want to support the accompaniments that are happening, if you want to support our partners, you can go to any of these events and the website. And if you scroll to the bottom, there's like a blue link and you can click on that. And that's how to get involved, to sign up. And then of course you can donate, you can support us in so many ways. But this is also a grassroots organization. And, for 40 years, this is how we've been doing it, with people like y'all showing up for events, coming on delegations, hosting events at your churches, at your schools, in your communities. So thank you so much for showing up today. We do have solidarity ticket options if you want to come and you cannot come to the concert, to the benefit concert. So I forgot to put my email in here, tirza@solidaritycollective.org. Thank you, Anika, for that. Okay, solidaritycollective.org. That's mine. I believe the other emails are already in here. And please do copy and paste this information if you want to reach out, if you have any questions that you didn't think of during this event. If you want to get involved in any way, if you want to learn more, that's why we are here. And again, thank you all so much for carving this time out in your day to hear about our delegation. Thank you for those who are coming back however many years after having gone on delegations. And thank you to everybody that went into our team in Colombia. And unless anybody else needs to say something, I think we're going to call it a night. All right. Thank you, everybody. And hopefully we'll see you all again one way or another. All right. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.